I'm going to ask, I have several kinds of questions to ask. And, one is, the Vedas help us understand, this is something, it was oral tradition, and it's something that actually, the body of the Vedas actually created over many centuries. Is that correct? So it took time for all the Vedas to actually take form.
Not really.
Yeah.
I mean, like the vedic thing, I'm not sure actually.
And the reason I asked that is that one of the assumptions, or one of the methods that was proposed by Sri Aurobindo is that to take a given word, where we know that Sanskrit has so many different meanings, a given word, even in different contexts can have different meanings. So if the Vedas really were generated or created over time, then we know historically, even just in the English language, just from 1 to 2 to 3 generations, the same exact word can begin to have many different meanings. So that's why I'm wondering about this initial methodology.
Okay, so what the record of the Vedas is basically this, that it was a knowledge which existed, and there is a person called Veda Vyasa who classified them into these 4 categories of the Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, and the Atharva Veda. So the Vedas existed because, as I said, they are records of these rishis' experiences. So it was a certain knowledge which was being handed over. Now, India has somehow been very poor in its historic facts, no? Like, we just have these texts to refer to. They don't give you dates, they don't tell you when, who composed what. It isn't exactly composition because it's received, what was received by the rishis. So the Vedas, every Veda is a collection of hymns by different rishis, or it's records of the different rishis which have been classified together by this person called Veda Vyasa, who came at a certain later time, from the time of the Vedas. So that's what we know of the, let's say, origin or the time of the Vedas, or the arrangement. If there's anybody else, I would be very happy, yeah.
Actually, what you just said is actually very good, very high significance, because Sri Aurobindo has actually mentioned exactly the same thing. A language, as the language evolves, and one of his actually his perspective is that the various words like Kritam, go, and those things, the original meaning slowly got concretized. Basically, they got like petrified, as you say. So the original meaning meant it was very fluid in terms of it was expressing the the inner properties of something. Whereas slowly, for instance, there is a word called brik. Brik means to tear. Okay, and in Sanskrit, brikaha means wolf. Okay, the one that tears. Okay, and he gives that as an example in this book called The Secret of the Veda, where he takes that as an example to explain that this could be the reason why the meanings got some got settled into those we know of today. Okay, so what you said makes sense in that. Yes. So over a period of time, the meanings got petrified.
I'm just phrasing questions. Same question, should I follow that? So,
I have something to say. Actually, I have heard about this word Anadi being used with Vedas, and Anadi means timeless, right?
Anadi. Yeah.
Right, and the belief is that nobody wrote the Vedas; they were just handed down by the gods to the human beings on India or Earth. Yeah, and they were passed down through the Gurukula system of education, and maybe they were lost and then compiled at different times by different sages. But then I don't think there was one single person who wrote, who was credited with having written the Vedas by himself. Yeah, it's just believed to have been handed down by the gods. I mean, the word Anadi, maybe you can explain better.
Yeah, Anadi means without a beginning. So it's believed that this knowledge was there, and Veda Vyasa classified them into the different Vedas. That's something. And the period of Veda Vyasa is very uncertain.
Okay, so then that raises another question, which is really what you've ended up with, which is and it's something that I mentioned earlier, which is in order to really make this a system of understanding, of knowledge, of truth, of really make it a practice that can be used now, you've already made it very clear too that the socio-historical is one dimension, the ritualistic component is another dimension, but really if we're placing emphasis on the psycho-spiritual, then it becomes more and more necessary for us to try to understand how do you actually implement this. So as I mentioned earlier, there's the text. Well, now we have text, but there's also the oral traditions, because there's still people who chant in the hymns. But to really understand and translate it into practice on a psycho-spiritual level, one thing is, as you've elegantly done, which is to take these myths or stories and show the inner dimension. So like the idea of the sacrifice not being material offering, but literally inner offering transformation. Does it require having a teacher? Does it require having gone through lots of preparatory practices to be able to understand it? Does it really require us to actually become rishis ourselves in order to understand the intent and the power of the Vedas?
Okay.
It's a big question. But how do you actually implement this?
Yeah.
More than just on the intellectual level.
Yeah. So I think I can understand it in two parts. Like the first part would be about learning the mantras and chanting them correctly, and that aspect of it. So for that, one has to do it with a guru, somebody who has had a tradition of this oral knowledge, because they would know how to produce the sound correctly. The entire efficacy of the mantra lies in the precision of the sound that you produce, how you pronounce every sound. And that has been perfected over time through this oral tradition. For that you have to have a guru. But my understanding of this deeper psycho-spiritual sense is that if any individual looks at himself, you have to just observe. A lot of thing has to do with self-observation. You will start noticing these different forces at play. If you know what they are symbolic of, more and more self-observation will reveal to you the functioning of these different forces, these different elements, which later on, if you read the Vedas, you can find a certain correlation, or you will start understanding why the hymns were in that particular order, as they were describing the specific experiences of the rishis. So it was each individual rishi's inner quest. So the journey that he followed has been in a sense charted down in the Veda in his set of hymns. But if one had one's own experience, yeah, because ultimately you can't necessarily take from somebody else wholesale. You have to have your own experience of it. You have to start identifying yourself, the things in yourself. For that, a guru is very useful because he can help you understand yourself better if you get the right person. He can help you understand. So in that sense, he can be an aid. But personally, I believe that one can even do it through one's own intense self-observation. Because these forces are at work. And they're at work in every circumstance, in every situation they are there. So the more you observe yourself, the more you are able to decide. And and then you can start, like personally, because of my studies in the Vedic psychology, I've tried to implement some of this in my case, in the case of my friends. So I've also tried to apply some of it in different situations. So there's somebody who's been unwell, and the person is afraid of the operation that he has to undergo. So you can tell the person, no, you see, you have to light Agni. You have to keep that will. You have to have that assurance in yourself that it will be right. So that's like the soma, the knowledge that it can be right. Because the moment you have fears, they are like these panis and all what will divide you and say, no. The moment you get into that cave, you've had it. You've lost your lights, you've lost your cows. So I believe that one can apply it in one's common life as well. But a guru, of course, is very important because he knows and can show you in a more direct manner where you need to go. So that's how I understand. Is it?
I don't know.
No,
I'm just inquiring. I don't know that.
So, first of all, a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Do you think that were the Vedas written in such a way that they were esoteric, so meant only for the specific few who could understand, or like in the Buddhist tradition, it seems like some texts are written, or some schools are more devotional, for example, like just repeating like the Buddha's name or something like that, because perhaps a certain level of society, that's the way, that's like, for example, farmers, etc., like that's just the way that they're going to be living that spiritual tradition because they don't have a lot